past the hour. So great. Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for our Ecosystem Marketplace webinar report briefing, going into our report that launched today, the 2025 State of the Voluntary Carbon Market. We're very excited to have you all. Thanks for joining us. I will just start with a bit of housekeeping to kick off this webinar, and then we'll get right into talking about the report. So just quickly, you may have noticed this webinar is being recorded. So we will post the recording of the webinar on our website early next week so that you can share it with your colleagues or reference back to it later on. We also will be offering a portion of our report to be translated in Portuguese, and that will be live tomorrow as well. This webinar itself will be translated into Spanish as we go. So if you'd like to change your language from English to Spanish, you can go to the bottom of your screen and pick the interpretation button, and that will allow you to select which language you'd like to listen to the webinar in. Last but not least, we will have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so please start sending in your questions to the Q&A box as they come in, and we will try and get to as many as we can at the end of the webinar. And with that, I'll get started. Thanks everyone so much for joining. I'm Charlotte Barber. I'm the Associate Director of Ecosystem Marketplace. We're very excited to launch this report. We've been putting together these reports for almost 20 years now. Ecosystem Marketplace has been around for 20 years. We have a long history of doing this work. And we've been publishing these reports since 2007. These reports have been very critical for the market to help understand the state and trends that are happening through the analysis of primary data that Ecosystem Marketplace does. We've also been tracking environmental markets in general for our long history, and really focus on driving transparency in the market to help fill those knowledge gaps and provide information to market actors to help them understand the state of the market through reports, webinars, articles, and other content. I'm really excited to get into this report for this year and understand what happened in the market in 2024. So with that, I will pass it to my colleague, Alex Procton, who is the Senior Manager for Data Solutions and Insights at Ecosystem Marketplace and is the report author. So with that, Alex, I will pass it to you to dig right into the key findings from the report.
Thanks, Charlotte. So as Charlotte mentioned, what makes Ecosystem Marketplace's research unique is that we're collecting transaction data on what actually took place in the last year from a network of over 200 respondents. In 2024, we had 82 respondents sharing transaction data with us. We combined this data with publicly available data from carbon standards that gives us information about project registrations, credit issuances, and retirements. And all of this data is available on our online Global Carbon Markets Hub that offers some interactive visualizations, including the data that we're sharing in this report right now. So please give that a look after you've had a chance to digest some of the findings from this report and this presentation. So first, to start, I'd like to orient everyone on what actually happened in the market in 2024. And so with this chart, we're seeing the full life cycle of carbon credits from the issuances by registries, the transactions that take place between carbon project developers, intermediaries like resellers, aggregators, and end users, which is indicated here in blue, and then finally credits that are being retired, which is indicated in the dark orange color. So the thing to notice is the trend of transaction volumes declining in 2024. The decline in transaction volume is actually slowing. We only had a 25% decline from transaction volume in 2023. That's compared with a 50% decline in the preceding 2 years. At the same time, retirement volumes, so this is the fundamental demand from end users of credits, has stayed fairly stable since 2021 within the range of 180 to 200 million credits being retired each year. And so with steady demand, but diminishing liquidity and diminishing supply that's been supportive of the price of carbon credits. They've stayed over $6 per ton since 2022. 2024, the average price was $6.34 per ton, which is more than double what it was 4 years ago in 2020. Now, the overall market is not the whole story. We also collect data on specific project types. We categorize all projects into 8 categories, and we have a lot of data on this available in our paper, but I'd like to draw your attention to 3 categories that are really representative of some of the shifts that we saw in the market in 2024. The first is at the top in green, forestry and land use. This is the largest category in terms of project issuances, credit transactions, as well as credit retirements. And in 2024, transaction volume didn't really change much from 2023. Because the overall market declined by 25% in terms of transaction volume, this means that forestry and land use is continuing to gain market share within the overall VCM. Secondly, the waste disposal category, which is indicated in the brown color, this category really saw a strong boost to demand that was driven by the acceptance of some project types by SOVCM's core carbon principles program. Transaction volume for waste disposal credits grew more than 3-fold from 2023. And then finally, the agriculture category. This is a category where we saw increases in average credit prices across the board for all different credit types. But we're also seeing that it's really constrained by supply. So across the board with the market, this is a phenomenon that we're seeing repeated for different project types, different categories, that end users are searching for high quality supply. They're willing to pay a premium for it, but this is actually showing decreased transaction prices or decreased transaction volumes, rather, as supply is somewhat constrained by what's available and what's been issued recently. Now, looking deeper beyond the top level categories, we also categorize projects into these clusters. This has allowed us to look at the market structure in a bit more detail. So in this cost curve, we have along the horizontal axis, the cumulative percentage of transactions that each of these categories makes up in the market. And then their vertical position represents the average price for transactions within each cluster. The black line here is the 2024 average price of $6.34 per ton. So what you can see is that at the moment, there is overhanging tail of older credit types, things like at the bottom left, these orange credit types, renewable energy projects like large solar, wind power installations, other credit types like older forestry and land use credits. These are still being sold for below the average price in the market. This is sort of the supply that is not being embraced as high quality, not moving the market forward. Then you have the next 25% of supply within the market, which is coming from projects that are selling credits for about average prices. This is a lot of projects like Red Plus projects, forestry and land use, as well as the largest groups of agricultural projects within sustainable agricultural land management, and then these landfill gas destruction projects that represent this brown category for waste disposal. And then finally, there's projects that are being embraced by the most ambitious buyers. They're willing to pay a premium for things like clean cook stove distribution, clean water distribution, that provide really clear co-benefits to the communities where they're implemented. They're willing to pay a premium for project types like improved forest management, afforestation and reforestation that have really high integrity, that are able to deliver some of these removal credits that are really sought out and high demand. And then we even have a very small fraction, something like 1% of our data set that comes from engineered removal credits like biochar production. Those can trade for up to 8 times as much as the next most expensive credits. So really starting to see some differentiation between project types in terms of the average price of credits, as well as demand, but also seeing some ways in which supply is constrained. And as we looked at the ways that market participants look for high quality credits from the VCM in 2024, there were a couple of themes that really stuck out to us. The first, as I hinted at in the last slide, was that there's really strong demand from buyers for credits that represent removals of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And the average price for these credits increased, but the transaction volume for these credits actually declined somewhat. And that's another indication to us that supply for these credits is really constrained. This has driven up the price premium. In 2024, buyers of removal credits paid more than 4.5 times as much as buyers of credits that just represent reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. The other thing that really stood out to us was the growing premium on credits that come from recent vintages. So looking at the average price of credits for the last 5 years compared to older credits, in 2024, buyers paid more than 3 times as much for recent credits. But this is compared with a 53% premium that we saw in 2023. Buyers are really seeking out credits that come from newer vintages because they feel that this offers more assurance of quality, especially when it comes to more recent methodologies that are being used and advances in validation and verification technologies that are being used to assure that these actual emissions reductions, carbon removals took place for the credit to be issued. Another big trend in 2024 was the continuing rollout of the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market's Core Carbon Principles program. This program started in 2023, but in 2024, the CCP approval for individual project types began to be rolled out. There were 5 project types that were approved by ICBCM in 2024, but of those 5 project types, there were only really credits available from 3 project types. That was landfill gas destruction, ozone depleting substances, and fugitive emissions credits. But for those credits, we did see a clear early signal for demand for core carbon principles approved credits. We saw the total waste disposal category volume grow over 3 times based off of demand for landfill gas destruction credits. And for CCP approved projects, we actually saw that landfill gas destruction credits, the average price increased in the second half of the year by 35%. That's after this project type was approved in July 2024. Now, the other 2 project types that were approved by ICBCM for core carbon principles were RED Plus and afforestation, reforestation, revegetation, both nature-based project types in the forestry and land use category. But for the most part, credits from these project types that are CCP approved are not available on the market. That's because these 2 methodologies, VM47 and VM48, which are expected to provide most of the supply of CCP approved credits for these categories, have not started to issue credits yet. The first project for VM47 was registered in the VCS standard in 2025. The VM48 projects, they're still waiting for some baseline data to be made available by Vera so the project developers can switch over to that standard. In our research, we really found that this is something that a lot of market participants need more context on, not just on what's available now, but also what's still to come for assessments for CCP eligibility, as well as the operationalization of new project types. For example, cook stove distribution and biodigester distribution that have been approved in 2025. So a big strength of working with data from our network of respondents is that we can not only receive qualitative data from them about the average price and volume of their transactions, but we're also able to reach out to them to receive qualitative data. And we did just that this year. We polled 66 respondents, asked them to complete structured and unstructured survey questions, and some insights from that are sprinkled throughout our report. I want to draw your attention to one really interesting finding, which is that we asked the same questions about the biggest factors that respondents found to influence the VCM in 2004. both in 2023 and 2024. And some of these were consistent over the years. So in both 2023 and 2024, respondents named media publications as one of the most important factors for both supply and demand. Other factors have become much more important. For example, government policies and certifications like the core carbon principles. On the other hand, respondents said that climate targets that are set individually by end users, such as the Voluntary Carbon Market Integrity Initiatives, Claims Code of Practice, or Science-Based Target Initiative Net Zero Standard, those have become less important to our respondents, which again tend to represent the sell side, project developers, credit aggregators, and resellers. So it's definitely been a year of transformation within the VCM as we've moved towards definitions of higher quality credits. And we've seen buyers start to embrace these definitions both through their own actions as well as embracing the ongoing rollout of core carbon principles. There's a lot more detail on this, both in the report and available on the Global Carbon Markets Hub. So I hope that you'll check that out after this presentation. But we also have 3 fantastic panelists who will share their perspective on market developments in the last year and future trajectories for the VCM. So I'll turn the presentation back over to Charlotte.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for walking us through some of the key findings. And as you mentioned, that is just a small portion of the data that we cover in our report that is quite extensive. So please take a look at our report, which is available for download on ecosystemmarketplace.com to really dig into more of those key findings and even more granularity that we go into with the data. I think it's particularly interesting and leads well into our next speaker to imagine what such a strong demand and price signal for landfill gas credits that have CC pre-approval sort of indicate and signal for the market, and what that will look like as we see the rollout of more CCP approved credits in the market. So we're really looking forward to hearing from Michaela Waldman, who's the Senior Manager for Market Engagement at ICBCM. And so with that, I'll pass it to you, Michaela. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlotte. And thank you, Alex, for that presentation. So Alex did cover some of this in his presentation, but I can give a bit more context here. So the ICVCM is an independent governance body that is committed to ensuring high integrity in carbon markets. And our mission is to establish a clear and robust quality threshold for carbon credits that will give confidence to buyers and stakeholders across the market. And then this is the quality threshold that's defined by our core carbon principles, so the CCPs. These principles set out the global bar for what makes a carbon credit high integrity. And these CCPs really ensure that credits are grounded in science and deliver real emissions reductions or removals and support sustainable development, especially for Indigenous people and local communities. So to implement this in practice, we use a rigorous 2-tick assessment process that is based on our assessment framework. And so to be clear, we do not assess at the project level. So we don't approve projects or project types. Instead, we assess both carbon crediting programs against our CCPs to ensure that they have high integrity in the governance and that the way they're managing credits with transparency and fairness and high integrity. And then we also assess in parallel the program's methodologies. So these are the specific rules for how credits are calculated and verified. So it's only when both the program and then its methodology meet our CCP criteria that a credit can be tagged with the CCP label. And this is why we call it kind of like the 2-tick process. And then, as mentioned, as of today, there are 6 programs and 19 methodologies that have been CCP approved. So this means that there are already high quality credits that we can see in the market with the CCP label. And then this is continuing to expand. So our assessments are ongoing, and they cover a very broad pipeline of new programs and methodologies, and the status of all of these assessments. So which project types are being looked at, with which methodologies fall under each project type, which programs are being assessed, can all be found on our ICVCM website, where you can see a clear table of the assessment status. But ultimately, assessment is really just kind of one piece of the ICVCM work. We also have launched 13 continuous improvement work programs. So that's our CIWPs, which tackle persistent challenges and opportunities in the market. We recently just published our CIWP report on permanence, which can also be found on our website. And then we're continuing to dive into other topics, including the CIWP that just launched on market transparency, scalability, and standardization. So these CIWP programs ensure that our standards continue to evolve with the market's needs, and we're always aiming to raise the bar of quality and integrity. We also have a CIWP that's due to kick off soon on renewable energy methodologies. So that's to explore ways of raising the integrity of the renewable energy methodologies that are currently in the market today. So then in terms of impact in the short term, I saw a question about this, but CCPs are already shifting the market as described in the presentation, and you can see more details in the ecosystem marketplace report. But we're seeing a very strong demand signal for high integrity credits, and we do see buyers paying premiums and prioritizing credits with the CCP label. And then additionally, there are new projects who are transitioning to CCP methodologies. So that includes the Makame Savannah Carbon Project in Tanzania that you will hear about shortly. And then kind of looking ahead, the CCPs are really setting the foundation for the market to scale with integrity. So as more credits are approved under our high integrity methodologies, and as our CIWPs continue to refine best practices, we'll see both the supply and the demand ideally align around the share quality benchmark. So kind of with that, I do encourage everybody to explore the ICVCM website, which I mentioned. You can see the status of all of our assessments, where we are in the CIWP process, the outputs, and then various other resources coming from the ICVCM. And yeah, so thank you for this opportunity to share in this webinar. And with that, I will pass it back to you, Charlotte.
Great. Thank you so much, Michaela. Yeah, and I think it's really important to understand the process that ICVCM undertakes with assessments and all the information available on your website, as well as understanding that this is an iterative process with your CIWPs and really trying to continue to push the frontier of integrity and quality in those definitions. There was a lot of anticipation and high expectations for ICVCM in the market in 2024. And although we're early in sort of the rollout and implementation of these assessments and seeing that supply come online, it seems like there's some really promising price signals that I'm really curious to see how they impact product developers as well in informing their decisions around whether they'll transition or originate new projects with these under these higher integrity methodologies. So with that, I think this is a great transition into our next speaker, Kisaro Thomas Lambutwa, who is the project manager at the Makame Savannah project under Carbon Tanzania. So I will pass it to Thomas now. Thomas, if you can turn on your camera, we'll hand it to you to share a bit more about your project and experience as a project developer. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Charlotte. Hi, everyone. My name is Kisaro Thomas Lombutwa, is how sincerely Charlotte has introduced me, and I'm the carbon project manager at Makame Wildlife Management Area. So I'm a Maasai, born and raised at Ngabolo village, one among the 5 member villages forming the Makame Wildlife Management Area, and other being Ikyuchbor, Ndedo, Makame, and Katikati in the northern part of Tanzania. So in my tradition, if you are born a boy, it means you are expected to grow up to protect the community. So while I was expected to become a warrior, education has transformed in that path. The spear became the pen, and the shield an exercise book. So today, I'll be talking about the carbon project at Makame Wildlife Management Area, which is a registered community-based organization in 2006. And of course, it is the largest wildlife management area in Tanzania, having an area of about 4,000 kilometers square. It is also the first wildlife management area to successfully invest in a carbon project, which is partnering with Carbon Tanzania since 2016. So this project is an environmental initiative that aims at protecting forests for communities, wildlife, and climate. So we use the RED plus approach, to address the carbon emission while helping villages manage their land sustainably. So the communities retain full rights and decision-making power, and revenue from carbon credit sales is shared locally, delivering both environmental and social benefits to the community. So I was born in the year when the WMA was proposed in 1998, after the Tanzanian Parliament passed the WMA Act. And I have heard from our elders how hard the process was at the first. People feared that the WMA is just another way to grab the land. So if your land is taken and you are compensated, then you are settled. But for us, it's very different, because land is everything. It is life. So over time, with trust and good leadership, the community began to see the WMA not a threat, but as a way to protect what matters us. So in the early years of establishing the WMA, it was difficult to protect the area, because the member villages were required to contribute some amount of money to pay for the fuel to do patrols to protect the whole area. But it was not enough, for the WMA has remained just vulnerable to encroachment and poaching. So as time goes, the situation began to change. When the WMA started receiving funds from tourist investment, which is tourist hunting, and the donors, like Hanegard Foundation. So in 2019, the first carbon credit funds arrived, and that made a huge difference. It gave us reliable resources to protect our land and help secure the project area itself from the threats. And although there is an increasing pressure from the outside seeking land for farming, the WMA, working closely with the district, is securing the land, and because it's having the reliable funding and strong protection measures in place. This collaboration has made the area much safer from external threats, such as land degradation and illegal farming. So with the carbon revenues, we improved the protection of the WMA and the carbon project area from encroachment. Other projects includes building 4 dormitories and 2 maternity wards that help students and mothers stay safe respectively. More importantly, we bought 15 high-quality bulls to improve cattle breeding, which make a big difference for local livelihoods, as we all depend on livestock. We also built classrooms, hired volunteer teachers, provided health insurance for low-income families, built new offices, and all these are the projects that the community made decision on. So these are real, visible benefits, and they come from the community having control over the revenue is used. So Now, as Alex has explained about VM 048, I'll be talking a bit about experience of the transition from VM 7 to VM 48, which is more consolidated method from Vera. So this involves also expanding about the area of the carbon accounting, the Makame WMA area. So previously, back 2016, to date, we were accounting the areas in the northern part of the WMA for carbon accounting. And knowing that this is a big change, it was important to involve the community fully. And we shared the proposal during the authorized association meetings, which is AA for the Makame, and the community agreed of the transition. So this was just the part of what we call FPEC, which is free, prior, and informed consent, which means people have the information and understand and agree before anything goes on. So after the community agreed, we worked together on a new forest inventory just early this month, which included 20 sampling plots, 10 plots being in the forest and 10 being in the post-deforested areas, which is the requirement of the Vera for a new consolidated methodology VM 48. So this process has involved members from Carbon Tanzania, I myself and our CIO, members from Makame WMA, involved the Terra Carbon, and the district forest officer. This kind of transparency and participation approach is how we do things. And it is why trust remains strong. So people often ask whether carbon markets really work for communities. So I can say it clearly works. As at Makame, the community have power over the land and over how revenue is used. And the benefits are real for people and the land for the climate. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Thomas. It's so great to hear directly from not only someone who is managing activities for a project on the ground, but a community member like yourself. I think this just helps remind, market actors in general and folks who are in this audience right now listening, just how important it is to center the voices and benefits for communities to make it a really successful project and really bring us to our intended impact, which is not just climate impact, but really working hand in hand with communities so that they are taking part in the benefits as well as stewarding these programs, which is so important. And again, it's also very interesting to hear, obviously your project is early in the stages of transitioning to VM48, which is a CCP approved project, but really you have the strong foundations there given the benefit sharing mechanisms and the community engagement that you have. That free, prior, and informed consent is really important. And best of luck in transitioning your project. And I think Melissa will help give us another perspective from a project developer in understanding some of your experience and the way your business is operating. So with that, I'll pass it to you, Melissa, and we look forward to hearing more about your work. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Hello, everybody. My name is Melissa Sawaya Hirshheimer. I work at Equal, a carbon offset project developer. I work here since 2005, so I've just completed 20-year experience in this sector. I would like to thank for the invitation to join this panel and also take the opportunity to congratulate Ecosystem Marketplace for providing such valuable information for the market. We use it a lot. We share with our clients and partners. So thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Please, next slide, please. I'll talk a little bit about our history. It started in the year 2000. Equi Invest is one of the pioneer companies in the carbon credit market. In 2005, it called the attention of Bunge, and we had a joint venture with them. Just for 3 years, it ended in 2008, but during this period, we internationalized our activities worldwide, but under Equi Invest Carbon. But after that, in 2008, we went through a financial crisis, the carbon market collapsed, and we repositioned ourselves and focused in Brazil, rebranded the company and created the brand Equal. And we became the biggest carbon developer in Brazil. We advised more than 50% of the carbon credits issued for Brazilian projects associated with renewable energy. We have experience with more than 100 projects worldwide, the majority of them in Brazil, registered under the CDM standard, under UN custody. And during this period, we also invested in renewable energy projects. We invested in wind farms, in hydropower plants, biomethane, biomass, and natural gas, always as a private equity company and with strategic partners. But now we are focused on the digital transition of our business model, mainly through Block C, which is a B2B decarbonization platform created in 2019, and through ACX, which is a carbon exchange, carbon credit exchange. ACX in 2023 signed a partnership with B3, one of the largest stock exchange of the world. It's the Brazilian main stock exchange, and the idea is to connect the financial sector with the carbon credit market. Next, please. Last year, 2024, was a very good year for us. We sold approximately 3.5 million carbon credits and brought revenues from around around $7 million to our clients. And these sales, besides the common voluntary carbon market, some of these sales was for a tax rebate program of the city of Rio de Janeiro, and some of them for investment funds interested in the future compliance market, as for example, the CDM transition to Article 6 mechanisms of the Paris Agreement. Next, please. Brazil has some peculiarities which brings to different climate investment challenges that we have to face. The National Greenhouse Gases Inventory of 2023 shows us that 48% of our emissions came from land use change, basically deforestation, 27% from agriculture, mainly enteric fermentation, and only 18% from energy, which is a little bit different from the average, from the average of the global emissions that mainly come from energy. 73% comes from energy, and only 18% from agriculture, forest, and land use. Next, please. We presented our NDC that aims to reduce 59% to 67% by 2035 compared to 2005. And the idea is to achieve from 850 million to 1 billion tons of CO2 equivalent in absolute terms. In order to achieve that, besides many other tools, we've created, we recently created the National Cap and Trade System. The law was approved in December of last year, and it's currently under regulation. It will have 5 phases until its fully implementation. That is estimated to take about 5 years, which means fully effect until approximately in 2030. There is this estimative of having 5,000 companies regulated by this cap and trade system. The ones that emit between 10,000 and 25,000 per year will only have to report in this first moment, but the ones that emit more than 25,000 tons per year will have reduction of obligations. There is a curiosity about this law, that is the interoperability between the compliance market with the voluntary carbon standards, and mainly for RED projects, which is a challenge for Brazil. Next, please. So in this context, we have, I would like to share some perspectives, which is, well, today, the Brazilian carbon credits are mainly purchased in the voluntary carbon market, but soon they will most likely be purchased by the national compliance market and perhaps by the parties of the Paris Agreement too. Today, emitting greenhouse gases in Brazil is free. However, the recent cap and trade law will change this scenario. And this interoperability between compliance and voluntary carbon markets will bring more complexity to corresponding adjustments. We consider that the voluntary carbon market is teaching the market many lessons. It's driving innovation to improve integrity and delivering more friendly solutions like carbon credits accounts and custodies, new environmental asset certificates like the RECs, the renewable energy certificates for electricity, biogas, and others. And it is a strategic ally to decarbonize the economy and foster sustainable development. However, it's not providing the financial resources needed to tackle climate change. The carbon market is an important climate finance tool. It is diverse, fragmented and complex, but we think that the main relevant results will come through the compliance market. That's it. So next. Thank you very much. I remain available for any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melissa. It's so great to hear about all of the work that ICAO is up to and how you've evolved to meet the needs and sort of evolution of the market over your time operating as a business. You know, I think it's really interesting, and what was great to hear from you is, you know, particularly in the Brazil context, how much you're working to collaborate in your national, with your national regulation, with government policy and decisions, and how regulation is really impacting your business and how you're responding to it. I think this is one example of, and a question I saw, and we'll sort of segue now into the Q&A session. But, you know, I saw a question asked about how we view the convergence of the voluntary and compliance markets. I think this is a great example, right? And a lot of that has to do with compliance markets utilizing voluntary supply in order to meet some of the needs of those compliance markets, whether it be tax, ETS, or even the early implementation of Article 6 mechanisms, sort of at the, in 2024 and as we go forward. So thank you so much for helping us understand this, particularly in the Brazil context. I think I'd like to open it up to the group. Melissa, if you have any more comments, I'm happy to jump in, but I do think this is indicative of the larger theme of that convergence between the compliance and voluntary markets, and that interoperability that you mentioned, Melissa. Does anyone else want to add anything about that, Alex? I think we definitely believe that is happening, and we'll only continue to see that grow as some of these policies are refined and implemented. A lot of country governments and ministries of environment are still developing their national policies, implementing their, planning around how they'll engage in Article 6, national registries to have inventories of their supply. So there's still a lot of elements and pieces of implementation that are needed in order to make this fully operationalized, but we definitely see that as something to look out for in the next few years.
Yeah, and this is absolutely an element of the ongoing effort that we're seeing to sort of set minimum expectations for credit quality. So this is another lever that governments have within jurisdictions to say, okay, this is the set of credit types that we consider to be acceptable for offsetting, that allows them to make strategic choices that can promote certain sectors, promote decarbonization within certain sectors. And then something that we actually have like a separate sidebar on within the report, because there's so much complexity and it's working in a parallel track to the voluntary carbon market, is the development of international credit markets for Article 6. And so that's something where individual countries are going to have to make decisions about trade-offs between meeting their nationally defined contributions and meeting those climate goals versus engaging with the wider voluntary carbon market.
Absolutely. Thanks, Alex. And Casaro, maybe a question for you. For the Tanzanian example, we had some questions about how much carbon revenue contributes to the protection and conservation of the area. Are those activities that you're undertaking being subsidized by the government or civil society, or is it just something that Carbon Tanzania itself is supporting? There's a huge burden on product developers to have a lot of capital to get these projects up and running. And as you even mentioned earlier in your presentation, it took a few years, I think until 2019, until your community saw some of the revenues. So can you just, if you can, please explain a little bit more about the structure and how financing works, or the challenges there?
So as I explained before, the Makame WMA that we Carbon Tanzania work with is having just two investments. It is investing on tourist hunting and carbon project. So over 35% of it is general income, including carbon, and the tourist hunting is spent on the protection. So the issue there that we experience at Makame is not just like the protection is depending on the funds, because the community is the center of the protection. The community itself protects the area. So the percent that the WMA is setting for the protection is to help just to fuel the cars, pay the VGS, to do the patrols. But in general, protection is done in the community by informing the VGS to respond on the incidents that they see as including encroachment or poaching. So the community is like working very close there with the WMA. So as instead of VGS to be the policemen, they just respond as firemen on the incident being reported by the community.
Great. So that community collaboration is really key to the project, and a major feature of how it's able to operate and be successful. Thank you. That's really helpful to understand. Maybe a bit more of a logistical question I'm seeing that I'll pass to you, Michaela, but could you speak a little bit more about the assessment process? I know that there were some questions about the timeline for rollout, but I think maybe just speaking a little bit more to the process can help folks understand that. And I think also, maybe bring it back to Brazil and this interoperability with compliance markets. How do you see that the impact of CCP with these compliance markets? So a two-point question there.
Sure. So to go back to our assessment process, what the SOVCM does is we're looking at the independent carbon crediting programs. So these standards that are creating methodologies and are helping to issue credits. And when we look at the carbon crediting programs, we're also looking at their methodologies to assess both for within our criteria of our CCPs. So once that happens, once there is a carbon crediting program that has received the CCP eligibility and they have respective methodologies, and these methodologies can range from different project types. The way we structure our assessment is we group methodologies of similar project types into categories and then assess them together. And then we come out with decisions on each one of those methodologies as they pass through our assessment process. And again, you can see kind of how these methodologies are bunched within our website to see how kind of they're moving through the process and where they are kind of like on the life cycle of our assessment. So that's kind of more about our process, and I'm happy to answer on kind of more clarifying questions around that. And then in terms of this question of convergence and interoperability, we're seeing more and more so. This is becoming, very clear that the markets are not so fragmented as they once were, and there's compliance markets that are able to use credits that were developed under independent standards. There's also convergence with Article 6, but had been mentioned earlier. And I think, from our perspective, what's so important is that there's this clear threshold for integrity kind of across the border. So no matter what market you're looking at in terms of supply or demand, there is a clear integrity threshold across. And with our CCPs and with the assessment process at the SOVCM, we see this as a clear indication of integrity that can be applied across markets. So something to help with kind of convergence as the markets move toward that direction.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I think it just provides assurance that this interoperability really exists. Obviously, some of that voluntary supply is being used already, but another layer where there is that quality and integrity framework applied, I think will just increase demand on the interoperability between these different markets. So thanks for that, Michaela. I think we have, just in the interest of time, we can maybe get to two more questions. So I'll ask a quick one to you, Alex, and then open our last one up to the group. But we had a question about why we think or why we see supply decreasing if demand has remained stable. Could you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I just want to pull back up this slide where we look at the life cycle of carbon credits over the last 5 years, looking at issuances, transactions, and retirements. So obviously, we're seeing different trajectories for both issuances and transactions, but both of those peaking around 2021 and 2022. But it's important to consider the data source for this. So the 10 registries that we collected data from for issuance and retirement volumes include the Clean Development Mechanism that was developed by the UN under the Kyoto Protocol. So after the Paris Agreement was signed, those projects, there's no more projects that were added to the pipeline, but projects that already existed in the pipeline were approved going into 2020, 2021, and then began to issue credits. So we do have the ongoing transition from the Clean Development Mechanism to the new mechanism from Article 6.4 of the Paris Agreement, the PACM, Paris Agreement Credit Mechanism. That's one cause for this. And then another cause is actually delays in issuances that we're seeing with this transition to higher quality, higher integrity methodologies and better methods of monitoring, reporting, and verification. So in particular, we're seeing that with both RED Plus and ARR projects that transition to the VM47 and VM48 standards has effectively stopped the supply of new projects that are coming into those categories from VERA, which is the largest standard and the largest standard for those nature-based project types. So I think we'll continue to see a crunch on the supply in the near future. And then I think obviously, given the cost of producing a credit can vary widely with the project type, that will ultimately unlock more demand as that hopefully increases the average price of a carbon credit.
Alex. And just for our last few minutes, I'll pass this question around, but what is each panelist have their eye out for in 2025? Where do you see the market going? Do you see it continuing to decline, improving? What specific to you are you really keeping an eye out for? So I will maybe start with Melissa, if you'd like to go first and answer that to put you on the spot.
Okay, hard question. I think we expect to have more regulation about the transition of the CDM to the Article 6 mechanisms of the Paris Agreement. And we see more demand for carbon credits under the voluntary carbon market associated with old SDGs. So bringing into light the other co-benefits of the carbon credits and more and we expect to have good results from the COP30 that will be held and that will happen in Brazil by the end of this year. That's our expectations.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think, two of these key developments being the rollout of ICVCM CCP approvals and agreement on core elements of Article 6 mechanisms, particularly for 6.4, we'll really start to see pressure and demand on the supply in the market as more folks start to participate. So really keen to see what that those supply and demand dynamics play out to look like in the coming year of 2025 and into 2026 and 2027. So thanks for sharing that. Kisaro, I will pass it to you now. What is your project going to be focused on in 2025? What is something you're thinking about as we continue in 2025 and activities in the VCM? Oh, you're muted. You could just unmute yourself. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. As we are now having the transition from the one methodology to the other one, which is more consolidated VM48. And as we are expanding the area of counting for the carbon, then we do expect the community to be getting more benefits. If you create more benefit to the community, then we do expect the market to grow. That's what I see.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's so great to hear about your project and just how important it is to center and really partner with and collaborate with communities, the stewards of the forest and the land, and those who should be accessing just as many benefits as the project. So looking forward to seeing the success of the Makame Savannah project going forward. Michaela,
Exactly.
over to you. What is ICVCM looking towards in 2025 for the rest of 2025 and beyond?
Yeah, so I mean, you did mention it, but as we continue rolling out and rolling through our assessment process and continue to look at CCP alignment across programs and methodologies, we'll see the volume of CCP credits in the market increasing, and then also as projects continue to transition to CCP methodologies. And as we continue with our continuous improvement work programs and come out with more reports on different market bottlenecks, we're also seeing kind of lots of initiatives across the market right now, really focusing on market integrity and market infrastructure and transparency, and hoping to see kind of like alignment across lots of initiatives and improvement in those areas too this coming year.
Great, thank you so much. And I know we're just at about time, so Alex, if you could give us your brief thoughts as well before we wrap up.
Yeah, thank you. Going in a bit of a different direction, I think working with data from this market, there's been so much achieved over the last 2 or 3 years in terms of bringing up the quality of data on the supply side and really improving confidence in the integrity of a lot of different credit types. I think what will be really interesting is how end users are able to use that to communicate more about the choices that they're making, about which credits to use, how those fit with their values, you know, whether in terms of a national strategy or individual corporate strategies. So would love to see that, more of that in 2025.
Great, thank you. And yeah, just to reiterate that, I did see a question about transparency in the chat. We obviously don't have time for it, but you know, at EM, we view ourselves as really driving forward this transparency and helping to illuminate and illustrate the picture of the VCM because of the opacity in the market and the inability to really access different segments and understand what's happening, which is really critical to developing the market, having it evolve and grow in the right direction, which is what we are seeing now. You know, to reiterate some of the key points that we make in our robust report, which we hope you dig into, this is a market in transition. We are seeing it transition from somewhat of a legacy market to a new type of market that has really shifted towards quality. That does have some near-term impacts in terms of the supply available as the market reboots, but some really promising signals for the direction that it's going in and the promise that it has in terms of delivering climate impact, which is ultimately what we are all here to do. So with that, I just want to thank everyone for their time with us today. It was really wonderful to be able to share the report key findings, hear from our expert panelists. Thank you, Michaela, Melissa, and Kisaro. Please be on the lookout for more content. The report is quite dense, so we will be deep diving on some of the key topics there to continue to help enhance understanding of the market and really try and address some of these knowledge gaps, lack of information, so we can really help market actors and observers understand what is happening, where the market is headed, and what's needed to make it successful and deliver, again, that really important impact that we're all aiming to do. So with that, just some last minute reminders. We will be posting this recording, so if you missed any of it or want to share it, please do. That will be available on ecosystemmarketplace.com, along with the report is already live, so you can download it there. We will also be offering the part of the report in Portuguese as well, so look out for that next week. And again, I just want to thank everyone for their time and support and participation in this report and work. So thank you and have a great day.